Welcome to Slash Forward. Is it time to get dirty? I think Jennifer will help us answer that simple question as she exacts her revenge in the 2017 film Revenge, along with other questions that plague most normal people, such as, should an aspiring entertainer expect to survive in a harsh desert environment with barely any clothes, let alone supplies, whilst being hunted? And is a bracing dose of peyote all that's needed to bypass years of training and education in order to perform an intensive emergency field surgery on yourself? We will take a look and familiarize ourselves with the circumstances that lay out the framework for these questions, and then dive in deeper to figure this all out. So stick around to learn a thing or two. Let's get to it. We open on a beautiful desert landscape as a helicopter thumps into view and soars overhead. But this is no mere desert tour. It's the private charter of Richard and his precious cargo Jen. They're taking a luxury trip out to spend an intimate weekend at his desert shanty. Jen goes in to explore her new surroundings as Roberto hooks a brother up with some primo peyote. Richard then finds Jen making sure the bed works before showing him a level of premature gratitude and has ya boy thanking his Lord and Savior. Later, Richard gets a call from the old ball and chain about some banal thing, with their toddler fussing in the background. He gives his opinion, as is the husband's obligation, but returns to Jen to confide that she and him are all good. Building a family is just super complicated, you know? Plus, he enjoys the privilege of infidelity. The next morning, as the cleaning robot hums away in the infinity pool, Jen saunters about casually looking for treats. What she finds are Stan and Dimitri, also searching for treats and unrepentant in their gaze. Richard comes out and is disappointed the boys have arrived a day early. His plan had been to swap out his mistress with his hunting bros so as not to mix friend groups, and possibly to avoid their furtive glances. But since they're here, they make the best of it with introductions and unabashed leering. Even though it's now partially bro time, Jen doesn't let that hinder their enjoyment of each other's bodies. By that evening, they're all fast friends, discussing their life desires and taking the male gaze to the extreme. Look at those gums! Dimitri then notices the peyote. However, despite their enthusiasm, Richard follows all safe hunting practices, which includes the exclusion of hallucinogens.
He sawed his own leg off without feeling a damn thing.
Damn, that sounds like some good shit. So he gives their little friend to Jen to tuck away for safekeeping. After that, Jen gets some music started and puts on a little show, providing the most long-distance lap dance in history. When Richard declines her advances, she chooses Stan. Hey, good for you, Stan. She must be really into you. Now starting to feel himself, he shows them all why they called him Snake Hips in high school. And he basically jizzes in his pants. Seeking to reestablish his place in the hierarchy, Richard takes her away caveman style. The next morning, as the apple goes to rot, Jen emerges to a still enthusiastic Stan. Having shared the intimate ritual of dance, he now considers her his property and provides uninvited touches under the presumption that they're now at least halfway boyfriend-girlfriend. Richard's gone off to provide their passports to the game warden, and with Dimitri sleeping off his hangover, Stan keeps Jen feeling comfortable and protected by possessively and awkwardly staring at her without break, possibly confused as to why she has not yet backflipped onto his dick. She decides to go pack for her departure, leaving him to wonder what he did to earn her scorn. You know, this always happens to nice guys. I mean, he even respectfully stays hidden as she gets dressed. Females just don't appreciate chivalry anymore. He cordially invites her to visit him after their vacation is over, but she has to wash her hair that day.
What is it you don't like about me?
He hopes to logic her into falling for him, and she attempts to delicately navigate this tender rose garden by telling him it's because he's a short king. But as he points out, he was short when she danced up on him. He now feels entitled to acting like a stubby bitch and blames her for turning him on. Now that she's indebted to him, he decides to take what he feels is owed. Dimitri wanders in with his marshmallow treats and, after consideration, removes any doubt about what kind of person he is. When Richard returns, he gets the sense that the vibe is somewhat off, so Stan steps right up and comes clean. Richard goes to soothe his lady and promises to take care of everything. After Jen wakes up, Richard surprises her with a job offering in Canada and a hefty wire transfer. This goes over not well, but she has to understand that she's like so irresistible, and he and Stan are business partners. That's no small thing. Richard proves to be unappreciative of the invocation of his wife. and with things turning physical, Jen takes off running. They all give chase, each to their own ability and fitness level, and despite maintaining the gap, she is ultimately thwarted by the deepness of geological time. With shit getting real, Richard tries to talk her back from the ledge, agreeing to call in Roberto and reschedule her pickup for 30 minutes from now. This creates enough comfort to allow him to move in for a shove over the edge. Luckily though, she does not hit the ground. The plan he just formed in his head is that they clean up, do their traditional hunt, and return home acting as normal as possible for a trio of business bro psychos. Given the stakes now, they all agree. So while she chills out for a bit, Richard burns up any evidence that she ever even existed. Then the boys gear up to go LARPing as big men. We then get a documentary-style close-up of an ant in its normal habitat, but getting totally douched with blood, which happens to be draining from Jen's mouth and abdomen. Despite nature closing in to have her meal, Jen still has the light in her. After a brief appraisal of the situation, she attempts to acquire her headphones to use as a mini lasso to acquire the lighter. Now with +2 fire attribute, she sets her desiccated throne alight, and before self-immolating, the aged tree gives way and releases its grasp on her. While she attempts to recuperate, the steady hum of the lads on their various motor-powered conveyances warns her of impending danger. She slithers for cover like a sidewinder, leaving them holding their dicks on this one. They can't believe it, and Stan uses this as an opportunity to pivot to a rescue mission. But for once, these men have committed to something and are unwilling to risk everything for her. Plus, as Richard rightfully points out, he wasn't acting so squirrely when he was tipping over that first domino. So they ride off to hunt as their ancestors did, in luxury vehicles, only arriving at the base of the cliff after the sun has set. She's long gone now, but is iPodless and has left a generous trail. They follow the thick ropes of blood across the terrain, but it terminates at a silty river that bifurcates the desert. They split off to cover both directions, and Stan volunteers to wait at home base here in case she circles back. This has the added benefit of keeping his soft ass warm and his hands clean. Jen is a good way downriver when she hears the roar of a motor approaching. Dmitri may regret opening up that muffler to accentuate his vroom vrooms. She stays under for his initial pass. After catching her breath, she sees that Dmitri is not too far away and is preoccupied with his piece. The idling ATV masks her stealthy approach. Unfortunately, after obtaining the gun and demonstrating she has the courage to squeeze the trigger, there is no release. He calls it in, confirming his intent to kill, which gives Stan great relief. Then he gives her the old Fezzik, pulling her out for the sole purpose of gloating over his hunting technique. But in the process, she unsheaths his blade and stabs him clean in the eye, and with a genuine buck knife, so it slides in easy and stays in place. He makes a big show of it before going down for good. Now, as she watches him sink into the dark waters, she understands that killing's not too bad when it's justified. She then goes blasting across the countryside in her new ATV, riding it until the tank is dry as a bone before continuing on foot. She finds a cozy little cave and gets a comforting fire going as she takes inventory of her new supplies. Among them is some designer water, which she guzzles down. She really feels like she should be doing something about that branch, but removing foreign objects is not recommended. But what if? Through the power of peyote mixed with dirt for some much-needed minerals, all pain washes from her existence. While under the influence, she teaches herself the workings of the tactical shotty before her pupils fully dilate and she sees into infinity. Here, the music convinces her that she's a surgeon now, and with these talented hands, she fashions the tools of her trade. She begins by cutting away at her rib meat with a hot knife so she can gently remove her playful intruder. Then, to stem the flow of blood, she expertly cauterizes the wound. The next morning, Stan wakes up to a bloody surprise. Both of them assume Dmitri couldn't wait to get in some animal hunting, just like Richard. But when Stan goes to take his morning leak and wash up in the water, he discovers the river to be unclean. So instead, he takes his morning puke and then risks moistening up the leather upholstery in order to have a quiet moment to let it all out. Richard studies every fold and boil of Dmitri's face, letting the rage well up inside as this new discovery complicates their plan to act as though nothing happened. Richard reasserts his control over the situation, but is undermined when Stan begins pointing fingers again. He plays it cool, but gives his boy a little pop for his insubordination before rolling out. They journey across the open landscape as Jen begins to wake up from surgery with the added bonus of an unexpected, but bitchin' scarification on her abdomen. She now contains the spirit of the eagle, but also a little peyote as well. However, she wakes up again to find her tat intact, but gets her head blown off in a downward spiral of disturbing hallucinations hallucinogenic imagery. She eventually comes out of it fit as a damn fiddle. Ready to seize the day, she emerges from the safety of the cave with her equipment upgrades and finds a high spot that allows her to stretch out and stand tall, feeling the renewed vitality of her body. Meanwhile, the boys have reached the ATV. Putting themselves in her shoes, they decide to check all the mountains nearby. Stan questions the wisdom of splitting up, but Richard is really squeezing on his sack right now, so they follow the plan. As Jen surveys her territory, she catches the glint of the makeup mirror Stan's using to make an assessment of his reconfigured nose. When he emerges from behind a hill, she's able to observe his path into the mountains. On the rugged, elevated terrain, he's forced to follow a set route that makes him easy to track. As she makes her way in his direction, he runs low on petrol. He stops to get out the reserve can and begin fueling up. As he goes about his business, Jen is just around the bend taking careful aim. However, it's hard to line up with this level of magnification, plus the kickback. She does make contact and recover quickly. However, he has now disappeared from her field of view. She closes the distance quickly and finds his panic trail leading away from the scene. She follows slow and steady while he, recognizing that he's giving away his location, tries to tie off his wound and remove his blood-filled boot. The trail does go cold, and she ponders this as he circles around behind her. Stan has enough time to line up a shot, but with his bum shoulder, all he manages to do is gauge her ear, which she had considered doing at some point anyway. She scrambles and runs, ears ringing as he takes pot shots at her. Thinking quickly, she leaves behind a pokey surprise. The shards find purchase and run deep. Completely embedded, Stan is left with no real option other than to bite the towel and make sweet finger love to the sole of his foot. But man, you would not believe the relief when it's out. It's almost better than never having had glass in there to begin with. He makes it back to the car, which is hard to start up with his pedal foot squirting the way it is. But once started, he goes bombing down the trail. So Jen stops, takes careful aim, and right at the last moment, puts her round through the headrest. She steps up to admire her work and then commandeers the vehicle. Meanwhile, Richard is trying in vain to raise his pal on the radio. He does this until nearly dead, but luckily the battery goes first. With no other choice, he goes back alone, which is probably for the best because he's significantly dehydrated. He zooms back in the dark, ready for anything, and arrives at sunrise. He cools his heat-stroked brain, and with the place being pretty quiet, he takes a beat to dirty up the couch. After a minute, he calls Roberto to cover his tracks by claiming the boys went home early and asks him for immediate extraction. With a little time before he has to leave, he takes a moment of quiet introspection and then peels off his dirty layers to go rinse off in the shower. But before he can even hit that shit with some soap, a noise alerts him to a possible presence. He stalks out to the living room, guns ready, and he covers the entire floor plan to ensure the house is clear. He even takes a naked trip out to the edge of the pool to satisfy his paranoia. He was correct to be wary because he returns to find Jen drawing a bead on him and appearing as a vengeful spirit. One word earns him some slugs to the gut, rendering hours of core work totally useless. He drags himself along, leaving a slimy little slug trail for Jen to follow around in a full circle. But he doesn't know how far she's leveled up after farming his friends. Plus, his body is piss and blood all over. She reverses course, and when he realizes what's happening, he proceeds forward. He pauses momentarily one time to see about keeping his meat fresh before they continue on, round and round, until it's unclear who is chasing whom. But Jen becomes the victim of an involuntary slip and slide on the blood of her enemy, and he bonks her with the butt of his gun. She comes to with Richard bragging to her about how women always lose, but it's lost on her as he sounds like a grown-up from a Peanuts animated special.
The only moment when that was possible.
He apparently forgot about his gaping wound until she reminds him with a full and forceful torso penetration. Then she gives him one for the road. Jen emerges, thankful to be alive and that this isn't her mess to clean up. She then ventures out on her own walk along the edge of the pool, where she patiently awaits Roberto's arrival. This was absolutely a straightforward and well-crafted storyline. The focus here was really the growth and consequences experienced by the individual characters. But still, just to make sure everything is absolutely clear, the peyote was played up early on as a non-recreational drug. It was serious stuff that makes you hallucinate in a dangerous way if you're not being closely monitored, because you are unencumbered by pain. So whatever journey your brain takes you on, you're gonna proceed no matter what. I'm not sure if that's an accurate representation, but it was primarily presented to us to justify its use later on. I know that entire situation was far-fetched, but it followed the rules set within the movie's universe and was totally badass. Jen's life dream was to move to LA at some point. This tied into two aspects of the story. First, that their consolation of finding her some shit job in Canada was clearly not a fulfillment of her life's dream. and also that she expressed concern that she would get swallowed up by the big city and go unnoticed. This naturally drew out attention from the men since she was so alluring to them in this situation. Stan clearly viewed her as an object early on. Knowing that Richard was married and with it being unclear how long they had been dating, he may have presumed that she was looking for money or opportunity. While the interactions between Jen and Richard indicated that their relationship was somewhat serious and that they cared for each other, or at least she for him, it was established that Stan and Dimitri didn't know anything about this whatsoever. She provided some attention to Stan in a playful, party-like way, but you could see it take hold of him that evening. The next day, through his stares and their conversation, it was made abundantly clear that he felt she owed him something and that he was really put off because he assumed that she actually liked him after dancing with him. He actually expected her to carry that energy through to the next day. It truly was some nice guy garbage. I think the setting of the movie gave it a bit of a fairy tale feel, which makes a lot of what happened reasonable in that context. For instance, the home is intended to be secluded, but where? It's never made clear. They speak English primarily, but the men also speak French to each other. They're out near the desert, but it appears there is farmland nearby, and it seemed like they shot it in a way to prevent the camera from capturing neighbors nearby in real life. This is not a problem, it's just a demonstration of the intention behind how Coralie Fargit chose to set the scene. This sense of distance and isolation was also played around with in regards to accessing the home. Richard and Jen helicoptered in, but then the boys just showed up. Richard left to see the game warden and then told Roberto that he took the fellas to the airport to leave and his request to have Roberto fly out to pick him up. Are they really far from civilization? Is the helicopter just a status thing? What's up with that? That's about it. I think everything else unfolded naturally and with proper setup within the universe of the movie. I know some people take issue with Jen's seemingly superhuman recovery and the unbelievability of her field surgery, but I think it works and was justified in the context of the movie. Both action and horror movies are full of people continuing on under unlikely circumstances. I'm not sure why this one would deserve a higher level of scrutiny. Plus, the movie absolutely rips. It does so for many of the reasons already stated, but there are additional subtle factors as well. For instance, Dimitri got crept on, but per his design, he was feigning vulnerability to cause his prey to think he was the prey, only to flip it back around again. He talked about it at length and also discussed the nuance and philosophy of this technique when he was dunking Jen in the river. She learned from this and flipped it back around on him when she swiped his knife and then turned it on him. Similar to this, it's established that she's taken the time to learn how things work so she can be more effective when it's most important. She learns from her mistakes and corrects them in the future, keeping track of what works well and what costs her, and being careful along the way. It demonstrated growth and development, provided tension and action, presented believable character motivations, and did all of this with a very intentional and sophisticated visual flair. It's a seemingly simple movie with layers if you choose to go deeper, but that is fun and exciting on its surface level as well. This has got to be one of the best revenge films ever made. It was written and directed by a woman, which is important if you're telling this type of story from the woman's perspective. I've mentioned this before multiple times, but it lends an air of authenticity you wouldn't otherwise get. Even Blood Games, which is not a great movie, benefits from this under the directorial helm of Tanya Rosenberg. The low angles and creepy male gazes feel intentional and symbolic, rather than lurid and only included to provide a film some good T&A for the box office. A good example of how to handle this in the alternative would be Straw Dogs. Straw Dogs is not a revenge film per se, but it deals with similar themes of assault. It's directed by Rod Lurie, but also approaches the subject matter by addressing male desire and machismo. It has an entirely different feel to it, but does a great job of addressing these themes from that perspective. Additionally, the film is sleek and stylish, and has one of the best final girls. Jen's ability to survive puts her right up there with Erin from You're Next. The main difference between this movie and that one is that this one never loses its edge. This is not a value judgment, just an observation. Revenge does not present any humor in its violence. And while the gore in You're Next can be rough for the casual viewer, Revenge is a film that's absolutely slathered in blood. You could say it doesn't hold back, but it might be more accurate to say that it aggressively spews everything all over the screen. Everyone pays the consequences for their actions here, and Jen's retribution comes with significant costs as well. Not just in that she experiences pain and is forced to kill and whatnot, but also in that they set her up as a party girl who wants to be discovered in LA, but she gets her ear blown off and has a messy surgery to her abdomen that was not only closed up poorly, but left a huge scarification. It leaves no doubt that she's coming out of this a changed person, both physically and mentally. Now that we're here, I want to congratulate you for making it to the end of the video, and affirm that you are a very special person because of it. Before we go, I'd like to give a huge thanks to my donors, memorialized in the Hall of Headshots. have a website set up where you can support the channel through donations or merch. Any donation unlocks a growing collection of uncensored movie recaps. And if you enjoyed the video, I would love for you to become a part of the channel by subscribing. Thanks for watching.